Good evening. I'm Christian Overland, the Ruth and Hartley Barker Director and CEO of the Wisconsin Historical Society, and I'm delighted that you joined us tonight for the James Madison Lecture. It's great to see so many friends that have been with us for a long time, and I'm seeing new faces too, so if this is your first time, thank you for being here. So after a 2-year hiatus, we're so glad to be back at our headquarters with the James Madison Lecture. And this year, we're working on honoring the James Madison Lecture Series with a really special guest, and we'll talk about him in just a minute. But the lectures honor the work of Dr. Merrill Jensen, who was an influential scholar of American Revolution that taught here at the University of Madison, and was a member of the history department here, of course, as well. The series of the James Madison Lecture is co-sponsored by the Wisconsin Historical Society, along with the Center for the Study of the Constitution at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And we've been doing that for a number of years. The lectures are really supported by the Lynn and Harry Bradley Foundation. If you know about that foundation, you know their passion for the U.S. Constitution, supporting the education for that. And also, the lecture series is made possible with an endowment that was built up for it as well. And that endowment was put together by the estate of John Peters and private donors. It is my pleasure really to introduce you to the presidential historian, Dr. Douglas Brinkley, who will be giving the James Madison Lecture tonight on his topic, Great Moments in U.S. Presidential Election History, from George Washington to Joe Biden. Now a little bit about Doug. Dr. Brinkley is the Katherine Tsanoff Brown Chair in Humanities and Professor of History at Rice University, a CNN presidential historian, and a frequent contributor to CBS and MSNBC. As well as he's been a contributing editor to Vanity Fair, and he's received 7 honorary doctorates in American Studies. Well done, Doug. His work includes many capacities in the world of public history, which is where we actually had the pleasure of meeting years ago. He's worked with boards, museums, colleges, historical societies. I had the pleasure of working with Doug when he started his book on Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company. The book is Wheels of the World, Henry Ford and his company in Century Progress, as well as his biography when he was doing that on Rosa Parks. Dr. Brinkley's latest work is The Silent Spring Revolution that chronicles the work of leaders working in environmentalism, combating the diminishment and destruction of the natural world during the Kennedy era to the first Earth Day in 1970. 6 of Dr. Brinkley's books were named by the New York Times most notable books of the year. 7 became New York Times bestsellers. His book, The Great Deluge, Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans and the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the one published in 2007, received the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Book Award. He was personally selected by Nancy Reagan to edit President Ronald Reagan's diaries. His 2012 book, Cronkite, won the Fordham University's Ann Spriver Award and for outstanding biographies. And if you don't know a little bit about Doug, he's into music too. He received a Grammy Award in 2017 for Best Jazz Ensemble as co-producer of Presidential Suite, 8 Variations on Freedom. Doug is also the New York Historical Society's selected U.S. presidential historian, which is a post there now that he's been very active with. He's on the board of trustees for Brevard College, the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Presidential Library, and he's also on the James Madison Council for the United States Library of Congress. He lives in Austin, Texas with his wife, Ann, and 3 children. Ann is with us tonight. Thank you, Ann, for coming with Doug to join us. For all of you in our audience, thank you for being here tonight and joining us today. Please join me in welcoming this year's James Madison Lecture, our colleague, my friend, Dr. Douglas Brinkley.
Thank you for all of you coming here. I've had a great day. My wife and I have in Madison, and at Wisconsin Historical Society, they let us look at some of their special documents, things that might interest me. So I spent part of the day looking at things from the leavings of people like Theodore Roosevelt and Rosa Parks, looking at some of our early founding documents in newspapers of the like. I saw the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. I saw the Big Boy statue. I used to work at a Big Boys in Ohio. And I want to thank Stuart Leventon for being here. He's one of the great, beyond doing the book on Madison in the 60s, he did a great, he's one of the experts on Bob Dylan. And thank you for being here, man. And of course, only Christian, as you all know, Overland is just remarkable of keeping everything going, and you are in such great hands here, and thank you for being a friend and having me. You heard I have a pretty big topic if I'm going to go from Washington to Biden in about 35 minutes. So I thought I'd begin in this way, in honor of also thinking about James Madison. And as you mentioned, I'm working with the Library of Congress. The Madison Council, we're trying to keep the Library of Congress funded and keeping acquisitions alive and the like. But I thought a good place to start tonight would be about an under-known figure from the founding of our country named Charles Thompson. Thompson was the Secretary of the Continental Congress. So when we look at 1776 and hear the stories about Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and the rest, and the debates about whether we should keep our country, create a new country or not, Thompson kept all the records, all the minutes of everything as part of his job. He was head of the Sons of Liberty in Philadelphia. The equivalent was Sam Adams was the head of the Sons of Liberty in Massachusetts. Charles Thompson was a brewer, and so was Sam Adams. And he was considered really one of the single most important founders. So much so that on July 4th, or the original Declaration, there are two names on it, John Hancock and Charles Thompson. And they were both instantly wanted by Britain for treason. They were going to be hung on the spot, executed. And Thompson, in some of his sense of humor with this, but also dead reality, realized we got to all get involved with this. It can't be only us two moving around. And of course, you have, if you go to the National Archives, the great one that people come to look at with all the signatures on it later, when Hancock purposefully made his signature big so King George could read it with his poor eyesight. In the war, where he was moving around in carriages and avoiding apprehension, Charles Thompson was the government of the United States. His documents represented the founding of our country. It was it. This is like a government in motion. He was in one town in Pennsylvania, then he moved to another just to keep the hound dogs off his trail. And eventually, if you look at some of the letters that Thompson writes during the Revolutionary War, it's back and forth to George Washington. And what they're writing is, Washington did not care about John Adams and Lockean philosophy, or habeas corpus, or, the Magna Carta. Jefferson, is a Monticello, and Washington could care less about him playing the fiddle at night, or what he's planting and growing, or his experiments in botany. Washington needed provisions. Washington needed munitions, blankets, foodstuff, medicine, men with dysentery. When you look at Valley Forge, people freezing, soldiers losing digits, due to the winter temperatures. In the procurement officers, Thompson, he's got to keep finding things to keep Washington's troops equipped. No easy task. When the war ends, when Washington and the big victory at the Battle of Yorktown in Virginia, it is Thompson, as representative in himself of the U.S. government, that said, you have to be the first president to Washington. Only you can keep the country united. You are the authentic war hero, and being from Virginia, being a slave owner, being a plantation person, being a topographer, you represent the South. The southern states trust you. And in New York, Washington had camped at Newburgh by West Point in the Hudson River, saving it. And he was worshipped in all 13. Washington kept demurring, no, no, no. And finally, it was prevailed on him, he must. And so hence we got our first president, and Thompson went with him from Mount Vernon, Virginia, to Wall Street at Federal Hall. You can go there today in the building there. It's not the original building, but they have the balcony there. A hunk of the balcony, Washington, to the first inaugural. And at New York Historical is the chair Washington sat on. I was looking at Lincoln's shawl today when he put that on after, when he was assassinated. But this chair, Washington sat, got up, Thompson next to him, became America's first president. Thompson was so important at that time. He actually, Ben Franklin wanted the wild turkey to be the national symbol, and he picked the eagle, Thompson. You can look at some of his early drawings. They're like stencil kits drawing the seal of the United States that you see, President Biden on Air Force One or Kamala Harris on Air Force Two with and beyond. I mean, all over our seal. But there's no role for him in a Washington administration. He was opposed to slavery. That was not going to be debated at that time. He was talking about giving Indian or native land rights back, and he was engaged as a legal advisor for them. That wasn't the thing of the moment. And he thought women should be participatory, and we shouldn't be just wealthy men. He wasn't per se a radical in his fiery speech, but there wasn't room for him in that first administration. So his role was to go to Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, and do what Winston Churchill did after World War II. Write those multiple volume histories. In his case, it would be the founding of America, Charles Thompson, with the minutes of Jefferson and, Adams and all the debates. And, there are a lot of loyalists in Independence Hall for a long time, and the arguments, and it would have been a classic endeavor. But in 1800, when Thomas Jefferson with the Thomas Jefferson with the Democrat Republicans, ran against John Adams of the Federalist, we created our two-party system of today. And they were ripping and tearing at each other in 1800, brutalizing each other, Wolverine fierce battle. And Thompson did not think our country would survive if every 4 years we're going to the mat, destroying each other, and in this kind of showdown. And he thought, and made a huge error in the sense of what he did. He thought that we have to build up a strong president, that after an election, if it's the George W. Bush and Gore and Al Gore and the Supreme Court decides it, we still got to get behind George W. Bush. And we're going to have to pull together. And if that didn't happen, he fretted that our democracy couldn't survive. And then he did something that's unconscionable. He burned the founding minutes. And he told Jefferson in a note and John Jay that essentially that he did not want to debunk Adams and Jefferson and tell what they really said, because there had to be a kind of unifying mythology of sorts that will pull our country together. And you get from this Washington, D.C., named after George Washington. You get the Washington Monument, Washington counties, Washington on the dollar or quarter on you right now. There's this Washington mania, the patriarch of America. This idea, look, guys, we save presidents' birthplaces, their homes, their burial sites. We put flowers on them, on their tombs and their birthday. We kind of live our eras by presidents, so much so that in Plains, Georgia, where Jimmy Carter turns 100 this October 1st, a few days, there is a house there that says this is where bronze plaque where Jimmy Carter was conceived. Seriously. It's just this has become a nation of celebrity. The presidents become the ultimate celebrities. And this idea of foundational documents, with the Bradley Foundation cares about, not just the Constitution, but that early period, unfortunately we don't have the Thompson diaries, founding of our country, But we do have, of course, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the Bill of Rights. Some people could call the Northwest Ordinance a founding document. I today thinking about is Lewis and Clark expedition documents, founding documents in a sense. Louisiana Purchase, 1803 for about $16 million, buying from Napoleon, doubling the size of our country. So we get these building of the founding, the essential documents and heirlooms that Wisconsin Historical Society saves in so many different ways. And in the War of 1812, we have really the James Madison and Dolly Madison, as many of you know, to thank for when the British were burning Washington for trying to shuffle out heirlooms and things of our country out of Washington so they don't burn. Today, Catholic Church, I know some groups of priests that have integrated with seals and things to make sure when towns in Ukraine and places and in Iraq and Afghanistan that some of these documents are put in safe haven so they're not burned in a fireball. So you see how important Dolly Madison is with that. And I think outside of Eleanor Roosevelt, maybe Hillary Clinton, Dolly Madison is one of the women first ladies, go on to other things, but her saving of these is important. And also at their deaths, Jefferson and Adams, who had never got along well, the old codgers, if you'd like, decided to stoke a correspondence with each other, and they wrote each other back and forth. And we can read them, and they still had a seminal disagreement big one, where he insisted as an intellectual, Adams, who of course was opposed to slavery, lived in relatively modest means in the Boston area. And of course, his son, John Quincy, became president, who after he was president, John Quincy Adams spent 16 years in Congress as an ex-president fighting the abolition of slavery. But their argument wasn't over slavery. Adams insisted that the Boston Massacre is the start of the American Revolution. And Jefferson thought it was Patrick Henry's oration in Nathaniel Hale in Virginia. And they both would kind of, they're going around with something as large as what triggered this notion of creating the United States. How did it all happen in history, and how did it unfold? And the idea, though, of while we do in a cultural way build presidents up, and maybe, as we all know, we're in the midst of an election right now. Really, there was not much executive power given in the Constitution. It's not talked about a lot. I don't know why. Yes, Washington used Executive Order for Neutrality Act. That's it, under executive orders. Many people, and don't correct them, technically it's not true, but some people call the Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation Executive Order number 1. Because if a president could say, slavery's over, emancipation signed by an executive order, then what's the limit of what a president can do? But that's how dramatic it was. And obviously in this idea of foundational documents, Lincoln delivered them in spades. I mean, his first inaugural, his second inaugural, the Gettysburg Address, the Emancipation. I mean, Gettysburg Address is the perfect statement, not speech written by Lincoln, just a very powerful moment. But there still was a cult of two things up to Lincoln in the sense of generals. It's not just George Washington was a general, but James Monroe was the assistant to George Washington on the battlefields, and Andrew Jackson, our 7th president, the Battle of New Orleans and Old Hickory, and William Henry Harrison, the great general of Battle of Fallen Timbers, and in Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, and Zachary Taylor of the Mexican War was a general, he left Louisiana and Baton Rouge to fight in Mexico. And that military service gave us a lot of our presidents because you could be judged on leadership that was definable, right? How did you lead people in a very crisis-oriented situation? That was one group of the presidents that we had. And the other were the aristocratic, lawyer, intellectual Ivy League types like Adams's. And then you got, with Lincoln, somebody that never had left the United States. Lincoln never traveled abroad, ever. Lincoln grew, now, the whole story of Indiana, Kentucky, and Illinois, his big trip was going down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. Very significant, not much documentation about it, but he saw the horror of slavery there, with slaves being sold in New Orleans, had a profound effect on, but he'd never been abroad. He's kind of self-taught, good itinerant lawyer, very good. And there were no presidential debates in U.S. history, none. The first presidential debate in U.S. history is Kennedy and Nixon in 1960. Some people will say they were the first televised debates. Fair, true. They were also the first presidential debates, period. Lincoln, Douglas was Illinois fight between two in Illinois. Lincoln-Douglas was not a presidential debate. And as a side note, in 60, Kennedy-Nixon, it's said that people watched on television thought that Kennedy had won because he was telegenic, and a word that's entered our vocabulary. And Nixon was considered a winner by radio listeners on a very close election, 60. It was like we are right now, 60. It is tight. I wrote a biography of Walter Cronkite, and Cronkite, who grew up poor, St. Joe's, Missouri, then in Houston, really the school of hard knocks. Cronkite in World War II was covering aviation for the military. Dream was to be on radio with Edward R. Murrow, and he never made the cut. And they dumped him on TV in 1950, which was WTOP, about 20 people in a closet with with hardware ads from Maryland, Bethesda on it. It was nowhere in 50. And in 52, we brought cameras into the conventions. And he made side money, Cronkite, putting makeup and teaching for a fee how to talk to a camera. You know who took that class of Cronkite? John F. Kennedy. You know who didn't take the class? Richard Nixon. Nixon loathed TV. Wasn't his milieu. But back to it, talking about with Lincoln and those foundational documents. I mean, imagine we're in a time now with President Trump had 2 assassination attempts, and just thinking about Lincoln coming from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, assassins lurking along the riverbanks and around the train tracks. He was basically had an X on his chest. We don't call the White House till Theodore Roosevelt names it that. So Lincoln entered the executive mansion, as it was called. No security. Goats eating grass. People can just walk in the front door. Sometimes you feel history's apocryphal, but Andrew Jackson's inaugural, when people just climbed in through windows and partied, it's true. You can just go right in. And yet Lincoln is a target on him, and Maryland is a hotbed of secession. And in Virginia, where Dulles Airport is today, is basically in proximity to where the Battle of Bull Run was. You know how close that is to the White House of today? And the Confederates won the first Battle of Bull Run. Right there on the gates of Washington, D.C., the Confederates are winning. And Lincoln struggles in 61 and 62. And in the McClellan, his general failing, and only until he gets General Grant on the Mississippi River and has a campaign to go down and control Memphis and Vicksburg, and then sets Sherman across the South in a scorched earth philosophy of burning everything in sight on your way to Atlanta and Savannah. And Savannah got spared the burning, but Atlanta didn't. But in that time, somehow Lincoln persevered. So every president's favorite president is Abraham Lincoln, because no matter how bad they think they have it, Lincoln had it worse. If you're Joe Biden and you're worried about what's going on in Israel and Ukraine and you know, his mind of all the problem, but you realize, you look at a portrait of Lincoln and you get fortified. I mean, Barack Obama launched his career in Illinois at, you know, all embodying the spirit of Lincoln. Nixon, during the days of Watergate and Vietnam War, but particularly Vietnam, went down to the monument in the Lincoln Memorial where kids were and started talking to them. It didn't quite work, but he's trying to understand the younger generation. Theodore Roosevelt, our most scientific person. TR did go to church, but we don't know. He's the only president not to take, wouldn't take an oath on a Bible, TR, after he became president, when William McKinley was shot and killed in 1901. And TR claims that he saw the ghost of Lincoln in the corridor. His only occult experience in life was like Lincoln was there in the building. And so when Lincoln was shot, when Johns Will Booth did kill him, and when the shawl that the Wisconsin Historical Society has, that Mary Todd Lincoln gave, came with Lincoln on his body, and is now saved here in Madison. This garment, kind of a sacred garment. Lincoln's body was coming back home to Illinois when the Confederates dropped their guns and the Union Army, and everybody came marching home. The war was over. Lincoln dead. Nothing in America equals the drama of that moment, the death of Lincoln and the ending of the Civil War. And so Lincoln is in a, Barack Obama correctly recently said, Lincoln is like Gandhi, or, he's one of these rare world leaders that transform a moment in time and will live forever. But on practical politics terms, it all became Republican presidents. I mean, we really had Lincoln. Lincoln wasn't on the ballot in 1860 on the southern states. You couldn't vote for Lincoln. I mean, you think now we're fighting, can, Cornel West be on a ballot here, or Bobby Kennedy Jr. there, or Jill Stein here and there. I mean, Lincoln just wasn't on the ballot in the South, yet suddenly he's president. And the birth of the Republican Party and the winning of the Civil War meant this dominance of Republican power in the White House. Not just Grant, not just, but all of them, and many ran on their war credentials, Rutherford B. Hayes and James Garfields, and, right on down the line. Only but between the elections of Lincoln and all the way till 1932, the only Democrats were Grover Cleveland, who won 2 terms not in succession. So Trump would, if he won, would be the Grover Cleveland of the moment. Had a term not there, and then you come back in. That was it for the Democrats. Now Woodrow Wilson won in 1912. And here at New York Historical Society, you have there the glass that that TR had, that he was drinking water after he was shot by a crazed anarchist in Milwaukee. But most expressively, you see the document of the hospital that he was rushed to, TR, and the timing. And as we were joking today, they put occupation, and TR's writing ex-president, on the thing of being shot. But that's 1912, Theodore Roosevelt blew up the Republican Party with the Bull Moose Party, the most successful third party in American history, the Progressive Party officially of 1912. And he came in second. He guaranteed a Democrat, Woodrow Wilson, would come in, followed by Theodore Roosevelt and the Republican Taft coming in third. So if TR didn't blow up the Republican Party, you would have had a Taft victory. If you added Taft to TR versus Wilson, it would have continued. After Woodrow Wilson, it's all Republicans. Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover. And then in 1932, you get FDR. And FDR is a giant in U.S. presidential history. We usually rank, I work like C-SPAN in groups, we usually put number 1 Lincoln. Scholars determine this. But it becomes, Lincoln 1, Washington 2, and FDR 3 invariably. But look at Roosevelt, what he did. I mean, he came to Chicago in 1932, and at what was then the Stanley Hotel, but is today the Hilton right by Grant Park. And he gave the speech and called I'll Be the New Deal, did in Chicago, that term. And then with the stock market crashed and all of the problems, Roosevelt, prohibition inhibiting people, Herbert Hoover being blamed for the crumbling of the economy. And, he won easily in 32. And he wins, then look at that run, 32, 36, 40, 44. You got to get a constitutional amendment to stop this kind of guy who just keeps winning. And he's the beginning. Lincoln did the big executive order with his singular emancipation. FDR signs 3,400 executive orders. Executive power, executive power, executive power. Everywhere you turn. Nothing was stopping it. It rained what we call, or I should say spilled out. They used to call it the alphabet soup of the New Deal. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC planting 3 billion trees. The Workers' Progress Administration building bridges and tunnels and stadiums and roads, and Tennessee Valley Authority electrifying, the federal government electrifying rural Arkansas and Tennessee and the like. The Grand Coulee Dam, building modern Seattle by getting hydropower. The debate that FDR ran against the Republicans was hydropower, electricity should be run by the federal government. And the Republican class said, no, it's private sector. And Roosevelt said, no, we're not dealing with it. It's got to be, we have to be able to keep the federal government going. So these federal energy projects and the like. All, the big wins out of Roosevelt's Social Security. Everybody sitting here tonight, I would assume, maybe one doesn't, has their Social Security number they know by heart. I mean, it's so unusual. We live. That's who we are. We've been ID'd by FDR since the 30s, and this is who you are, your number, And this idea of paying in for your pension, and you get it back later, and Roosevelt, of course, does executive orders that some we praise or denounce. Give you one, but let you choose. But he created the Manhattan Project with an executive order. For the atomic bombs used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He used an executive order for Japanese internment. But he did executive orders for things that were more enlightened and aren't as criticized in history. But he did something that doesn't end till 1980. 1980. We lived in the age of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Because in his 4 terms, when Dr. New Deal, as he called himself, became Dr. Win the War, after Pearl Harbor and Germany declaring war on us, Roosevelt convinced the Americans that the federal government is your friend. You and you and you, we are there for you. You're a farmer, you're having problems, we'll bring in an agricultural adjustment officer and tell you about diversified crops. You're having an issue about transport. We'll build the road connecting these two places. It's endless, but he sold it. It didn't get us out of the Depression, the New Deal. World War II did. But he made us all believe that the federal government is your friend. And Roosevelt in World War II, we were all in it together, 90% of America. It wasn't a war of choice. It was a war of necessity. And we did industrial mobilization. You don't need to go tour, although I recommend you do. But you don't need to go to Normandy or Iwo Jima. If you have a World War II experience, go visit Norfolk and San Diego and Detroit and Milwaukee and these hubs of industrialization that our country did and developed it so quickly. And Roosevelt dies April 12, 1945 in Warm Springs, Georgia, where he bought a home because it's polio, thermal waters for his affliction. And you'd say, well, that's FDR. Well, why do you say all the way to 1980? Well, Harry Truman came in, and Truman is all about federal government being your friend. He had a fair deal on domestic programs. He integrated the U.S. Armed Forces. Truman created the CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Department of Air Force, National Security Council, National Security Advisor, all of this government for your protection. We're going to protect you all. Now you could say, well, yeah, okay, but Truman's a Democrat, and there's coattails to FDR, and he barely won in '48, which is true. But then you say, but what about Eisenhower winning twice, 1952 and 1956? Eisenhower was a New Dealer, even though he didn't claim it, because he was a fiscal conservative. But Roosevelt did not. Ike preached the gospel of the federal government. We built the interstate highway system. Eisenhower Highway System, the largest public works project in world history. Eisenhower's building these super autobahns like we're in Germany, all across our country, changing from railroads and rivers to trucking. And, he created NASA. Eisenhower. The Russians put up a Sputnik. Our response is the government's going to counter it by putting our own space agency and creating NASA. Once the Brown versus Topeka decision, throwing away Plessy versus Ferguson, which says separate but equal, meaning Jim Crow's been green lit. He comes in and Eisenhower says, the Warren Court says that Jim Crow's illegal. And he's saying the federal government's busting states' rights, going in. Eisenhower sends the National Guard, federal government into Little Rock to bring the Little Rock Nine in to integrate in Little Rock. And the point is there's a belief in the federal government with Eisenhower, who could have won a third term. John F. Kennedy. What is his inaugural? That's not what your country can do for you. What can you do for your country? Bringing the new generation into belief and service for government. He creates the Peace Corps with an executive order, and creates the SEALs of today, creates the Green Beret of government, but mainly does the moonshot. We're going to put a man to the moon by the end of the decade and bring him back alive. Who is that we? The U.S. federal government with taxpayer dollars. And we're all in. Democrat, Republican, let's beat Russia. We'll go to the moon. It's better than war. And that we did it. It's a kind of a phenomenal experience of American engineering and technology, and pushing of STEM. The federal government telling high schools to start doing math and sciences more. Kennedy has the short life. Lyndon Johnson comes in, and Lyndon Johnson is trying to outdo FDR with the Great Society. He's all federal government's your friend. He creates Medicaid and Medicare, NPR and PBS, wild and scenic rivers, and our national hiking trail system, Head Start and a Department of Transportation. It doesn't end. Government's coming to help everybody. And then you say, well, that's LBJ, but by '68, he didn't run. And then the Chicago Convention was blown up. They were starting to worry about Vietnam and the federal government. True. Suspicion was reigning about the federal government. But look at who wins in '68? Richard Nixon. Do you guys realize that Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency? Nixon did clean air and water. Nixon's for affirmative action. Nixon wanted to go, the government thought workers were working too hard and needed leisure time, and Nixon was promoting the 30-hour work week for a while. Nixon. Then you say after Nixon, well, you get, forge that transition person, but Jimmy Carter creates FEMA and Department of Energy. Jimmy Carter's doing Superfund sites for toxic burial areas. And boom, Reagan. And in 1980, Reagan cleans the map on that election. It's the end of the government believer Democrats in the Senate. You soon see the extinction in Washington of George McGovern, Eugene McCarthy, Birch Bayh, Frank Church, Hubert Humphrey. They're dropping off like flies because Reagan is shopping, you're being ripped off. That the federal government is abusing. And the validity of that is simply, yes, Johnson lied to us about Vietnam and so did Nixon. Yes, Democrat Robert McNamara lied about Vietnam and so did Henry Kissinger. What happened? What Warren Commission report? Why are there so many holes in the Warren Commission report? Why are we paying this much in taxes? And there started in 81 and on down, it's starting to be a suspicion that we're being ripped off, that Washington, D.C. is misspending your money, that we're paying too much in taxes. And the truth is, Reagan was a spender. He wasn't a balanced budgeter like Calvin Coolidge. But the impression, it started in our ether that the federal government is not your friend, and that you now start seeing people tilting after Reagan. Well, you get George W. Bush. Bush wanted to, famous read my lips, no new taxes, people are angry about paying for government. He flipped on that. But the reason he uttered it is they're feeling that the country under that spirit of FDR up to 80 had been center left, and it was shifting center right. Now, 41, one-term president, we can, many things Bush 41 did that are really important, meaning he was president when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Berlin Wall went down in 89. But the time of Bill Clinton winning in 92, Clinton was running on one thing, guys. I'm not a big government liberal. I'm a new Democrat. Bill Clinton watched Walter Mondale get killed by the right, and Michael Dukakis get a shellacking, and Jimmy Carter get decimated. And Clinton starts getting away from all of those and says that I'm a new kind of Democrat. Well, he wins over it, but he doesn't get that much percentage of the win in 92. Do you realize Ross Perot, as a third-party candidate, the billionaire from Texas, got 19% of the vote and ran a kooky campaign, meaning he was running, then I'm not running, and then I'm on TV saying this, and I'm this, at 19%? That's a disillusionment going on. And what was his issue, Perot, with that 19%? The sucking sound of your jobs are going to Mexico. NAFTA. It was an indictment Perot was weighing on Bill Clinton and Bush. Both of them. It wasn't D or R game. It was you guys, the federal government, the permanent government people, that you guys are ship the jobs out of Wisconsin or Ohio down places, and now our communities, the manufacturing industrial base is fading and dying in some cases. Now, it is true in 1993, and we were looking today at a document of Les Aspin, the Secretary of Defense, first year of Clinton. 93, Bill and Hillary Clinton tried to shop what becomes like Affordable Care Act of Barack Obama. They worked all year to get that health care bill done. They failed. 94, Newt Gingrich rears up, Georgian leader, Speaker Gingrich, with the Contract for America, which is a blueprint for Trump and a blueprint for 2025 in some ways. It's a 94, the right's coalescing on a much more anti-government agenda, something Reagan wouldn't have done, or Bush 41. And then Clinton's in trouble with Monica Lewinsky, et cetera. They're going to impeach him and everything. You know all that story. But so Clinton runs in 96 and wins by triangulating, by taking Republican issues and making them his. Oh, you guys want to reduce welfare? I'll do it more than you. You guys want a balanced budget? I'm not just going to balance a budget. I'm going to create a surplus. He was stealing from the Gingrich Revolution their hot topic buttons and owning them for himself. I saw Kamala Harris doing something similar last few weeks. It's smart politics. It's a way to start getting your advantage, saying, well, and then she was leaving Trump saying, no, I'm the one who first said that, and then you keep, and so Clinton survives the age of Reagan by going center-right, second term, in many regards. And then you say, welcome to the 20, what about 2001? Well, George W. Bush got sworn in as saying, I'm more Reagan than Reagan. I'm more opposed to federal projects. I don't want some Kyoto thing. I don't like the UN. Bush starting to go hard on criticizing the federal government, even while we're going big on Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. And you start getting a calcification of it's okay to say the government's ripping you off. It becomes, you must say it in the Republican Party. After Bush, you might say, well, Barack Obama, how in the world, Barack Obama I used to see in the White House a fair amount during this period, and he did get that Affordable Care Act done at great cost. He came in, inaugurated, great recession on. He bailed out General Motors. He got a stimulus package for the economy, and he shoved through, with not a Republican vote, the Affordable Care Act, which had been something liberalism had wanted to do and never got done, and Obama did it. And then the Tea Party movement happened that summer. They were all of anger about Obamacare and government coming back in play. And Obama spent the next years not able to sell progressivism in big, meaningful ways. He could do it in symbolic ways, like gay marriage, which becomes an important, or national monuments. Obama and the National Park Service adds Cesar Chavez's home and United Farm Workers to the Park Service, or Stonewall, first LGBTQ site in New York, or Underground Railroad of Harriet Tubman, Buffalo Soldiers, black soldiers. He could do that, opening the narrative of America up with executive orders. But Obama became a firewall president. He was for 7 years the stood and said, don't drill the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Don't slash EPA. Don't you dare touch Medicaid and Medicare. Don't mess with Social Security. He was saving the prizes of FDRism and LBJism and the like, at a time when they were to keep the anti-government forces at bay. And he did it. But the net result is it led after that to Trump's escalator, and to Trump routinely not only questioning whether Obama was born in America, but just talking about how the United States and the federal governments are ripping everybody out, want to do away with, get rid of education now, cut commerce in half. It's demonizing the U.S. federal government. We've been able to keep our armed forces largely sacrosanct. Democrats, Republicans in the audience, Trump, Harris, most of our get rally behind our men and women serving abroad. But even with Trump, he's warring with the generals, warring with the Pentagon, saying with Mike Milley, a general, I'm going to try you for treason. I hope you hang. And, we saw January 6th. It's a culmination. So here we are in 2024. And I think Trumpism, while it grew out of Barry Goldwater and George Wallace and Ross Perot, with a charismatic sales figure in reality TV marketeer like Trump. But he's inherited a lot of that energy and brought it to this very, very radical conclusion in many ways, that this federal government should be demonized. And the Democrats get nervous of getting progressive. They talk about it in their party, but that progressive movement has limits. And things like, are we moving too far and too fast on certain cultural issues that are throwing people off? What did you see Harris do quickly? I have a gun. She doesn't want to fight that whole thing that she's taking away your guns. She's got a bigger fish to fry now. I'm a gun owner. I'm okay. And Governor Walz, I'm a hunter. We're not there because they're going to have to talk a cultural language, because if the country is shifted center right, the Democrats have to play that center right and win enough people, meaning white voters that aren't just affected by our multicultural society, or a member for transgender protection rights, allowing people from non-European countries to come in mass in recent years, and all the things. And we are in a true kind of square off coming up in a few days between one who is more trying to be a little more like Clinton, be center right, even though a progressive at heart, Kamala Harris, and Trump, who's taking populism out of George Wallace and Ross Perot and others, and marrying that with some stark conservative people with money, who don't want taxation and don't like a regulatory culture. Because in the end, and I'll end, we're looking at the anger that goes on the right is against the federal government for regulating. They don't like it, companies. If you are an oil gas company, a mining company, a timber company, you are tired of getting punished because of a lizard of the Endangered Species Act, or you don't like that the federal government's auditing you. You don't, and many people don't like the IRS. You might say, wow, the jobs got sucked out, like Perot said, from Youngstown, Ohio. Why aren't they angry at the companies that left? Because companies, for whatever they were, gave you a check. You earn money. The IRS every spring saying, give me your money. And so it's created this battle almost over states' rights versus the power of the U.S. federal government. It's been a classic play in American history, but from FDR to Reagan, where there was a bit of civility with it, and Reagan was civil, even Bush thing, but with Trump, it took it to this new extreme, and we will have to see what happens. We are in a dead heat. Nobody knows what's going on. We can easily earmark 6, 7 states, yours being one of them. I have no idea what will happen here. And I have no idea what's going to happen in Pennsylvania or North Carolina or Georgia or Arizona or Nevada or Michigan, except it's going to be so close that invariably it seems like, unless some game-changing event happens, we're going to be in a long hangover after election night. It's going to be lawsuits, recounts, paper counts, this wasn't right, if it's that close. Meaning it's not the old days where you turn on Cronkite and it's 11 o'clock at night and the winner is, and we all go to bed. It's going to keep on going. Inflaming this, guys, is the fact that Hillary Clinton won more votes than Trump, but she wasn't president. Flaming it as Al Gore won more votes than George W. Bush, but isn't president. Point being, the Electoral College is something that Trump's to his advantage, and he plays it, but the popular vote, many people will say, why isn't each vote count? Like, who gets the most votes? The president. And it's a longer lecture, longer conversation. I'll tell you, it's not going away. We're here living in an electoral college world. The idea of the Senate abolishing that is not in my lifetime. I can't foresee such a thing. So you got to play the electoral map game, and that's what's being done. And always keep an eye on for those third-party spoilers. It's in this kind of climate. Jill Stein getting 1% in Wisconsin can change, or Michigan or wherever can flip an election at one. Ralph Nader, I don't blame Ralph Nader. He wants to run a third party, run it. I don't do that to people. It's your right to run. But it did make a difference in Florida. Minus Nader, you may have had Al Gore, who would have made climate change the big issue, not the war in Iraq, and you'd be in a different world. Hence why presidents are. The power that we've given them and amassed in them is so great. They are the largest figure, not in America, but in Earth. I mean, they transcend popes. They transcend, It's the rest of the world's counting in the United States, but we're having trouble realigning ourselves right now, looking at how do we elect somebody who's running on disdaining the U.S. government that they're representing. And what is this so-called bureaucrats in D.C.? Isn't it hard to run these agencies? Are these the people we're choosing to demonize that are making a modest living, trying to keep our airplanes running and safe? And so it's government versus non-government in many ways, and it's on the ballot. Good luck. Vote your conscience. And thank you guys for hosting me today.